All right, good Sunday morning, everyone, and welcome to The Real Story. I'm Matt Caron. Less than a week ago, Isaias knocked out power to about 700,000 electric customers here in Connecticut. And a little more than a week ago, a special session of the state legislature passed 4 bills, the impact of which are still being debated. This morning, we are talking to leaders of both political parties in the state Senate, and we begin with State Senate President Pro Tempore Marty Looney. Senator Looney, thanks so much for joining us on The Real Story. It's always great to talk to you.
Great to be with you, Matt. Good morning.
So, Senator, I wanted to start with this. Governor Lamont called for an investigation from the state's Public Utilities Regulatory Authority into the response of the utility companies following Isaias. They have said that they will be investigating. What is your thought? I mean, do you believe that these utility companies were prepared for the storm that we saw?
Well, apparently they were not sufficiently prepared, especially Eversource. I think the performance by the UI company was somewhat better, but Eversource, after claiming to have invested so much in system hardening and preparedness over the last 7 or 8 years since Irene and Sandy, to have this kind of devastation, this many outages, after all of the preparation that they promised that they would have undertaken, clearly means that some investigation of their management and their response is necessary at this point.
Senator, I mean, what do you make of the CEO of Eversource? He met with Governor Lamont over at their headquarters, and then afterwards he refused to even come out with the governor or to answer any journalists' questions. Does that alarm you?
It does alarm me, especially someone who is paid the enormous and exorbitant amounts of money that the CEO of Eversource is paid, to not have any sense of being accountable to the public and to answer questions is disturbing.
Yeah, you know, and we can't forget, too, there's also this issue of customer utility bills being very high. Again, PURA, the Public Regulatory Authority, froze the rate increases that resulted in some very high utility bills. But going forward, do you think any protections in that regard need to be legislated?
Well, I think we need to look very carefully, and I'm sure PURA will, at any rate increase from Eversource, especially in light of this. It's been certainly a very bad few weeks for Eversource with the reaction to their unjustified rate request, and then followed immediately by the poor performance in the storm. I think there are a number of things that will need to be looked at in terms of utilities taking a more active way to prepare, apart from what they claim to have done in the past. First of all, I think minimum staffing levels have to be much higher to be ready to respond immediately when a storm is underway. I think we need to take an additional look at burying power lines where possible, even though that's expensive. In the long run, it would provide great benefit to have less vulnerability to storms of this nature. One of the things I think that needs to be looked at is utility refunds or credits if power is not restored within a reasonable period of time, like 48 hours after a storm. I think that's something that really should be done to benefit consumers who are suffering all of the risks and inconvenience and still not having their bills adjusted. And then I think there ought to be some look at perhaps a fine for utility non-performance pegged to the exorbitant salaries that some of their management are paid. I think that should be looked at as well, and that these are all things I think that could be done to make the utilities more accountable.
All right, Senator, I want to move along now to the special session that recently wrapped up. One of the hot button topics was, of course, police reform and accountability. The sticking point there seemed to be the issue of qualified immunity. And you said, quote, "This change will make the state's towns and officers more accountable for their actions and make law enforcement adjust the way that they have operated." But, I mean, isn't the issue of qualified immunity a matter of federal law?
Well, there is a federal issue, but there is also now under our bill an option for complaints to be brought in state court. Currently, those kinds of complaints involving immunity are brought in federal court. This creates a state action. But it is a very rare case that would actually reach the level of breaching qualified immunity. Again, there would have to be egregious conduct on the part of the police officer, a serious civil rights violation done in a way that is wanton and malicious and willful. So it's a very high bar to be reached. I disagree with those who say that this is opening the door to frivolous lawsuits because frivolous lawsuits would not get very far in this process where the standard is so high. But the bill is a far-reaching one to improve police accountability and I think also professionalism and transparency in so many ways, apart from the issue of qualified immunity, which has drawn so much and I think disproportionate attention about this bill.
Well, okay, but does that issue of qualified immunity need to be reexamined? I mean, it doesn't kick in for another year, so we have some time to change it if we wanted to. Do you think we should do that?
Well, I think that we did build the time in if we need to, but I think it's a relatively modest change. It is, I think, reasonable if an officer really is truly a rogue officer engaging in outrageous conduct, that the municipality should have an opportunity to try to recover what it has to pay out to plaintiffs on behalf of because of that officer's performance. It's an accountability measure, of which there are so many in the bill. I think there are other important sections in the bill, increasing professionalism, like having the Police Officer Standard and Training Council develop standards for crowd control. We know that some communities do a very good job of that, others do not. That's an important piece. Enhancing training, enhancing minority recruitment, looking at implicit bias training. These are all critically important elements of the bill, apart from the issue of the qualified immunity provision. Also, the idea of requiring mental health examinations every several years, every 5 years for police officers. That's an important piece as well. The establishment of civilian review boards with subpoena power, the creation of an inspector general to take over the prosecution of these cases will inspire, I think, greater confidence in the public than our current system. These are all very important elements. Also, I think the change in our police deadly force statute, where police will now be have to be able to show if there was an opportunity to de-escalate the crisis, they should demonstrate that they have taken those reasonable measures to do so.
Okay. Senator, let's move along to the absentee ballot bill that Governor Lamont just signed into law. Obviously, it's going to be easier for people to vote during this primary. They'll just be able to mail it in. But the Connecticut chapter of the National Federation of the Blind says that they really do need an alternative to these absentee paper ballots. They want to vote electronically, and they say that this bill violates the Americans with Disabilities Act. What's your response to that?
Well, I think that this bill is going to open up opportunities for many people to vote absentee in the general election. Clearly, there'll be an opportunity in the future to look at ways in which the blind or other disabled might need to be further empowered. But I think this provides for a huge expansion of opportunity for people who otherwise might not be willing to go to the polls.
All right. Hey, let's talk about another topic that everyone's discussing, and that's the issue of schools reopening in the fall. Do you think that that's a smart public health decision?
I think that the crisis that we face there is that the more low income the family is, the more low income the student is, the more deprived the home atmosphere is, the more important it is for the child to have an opportunity to be in school. On the one hand, you have to balance that against the health concerns and the concerns about teachers and safety within the building. On the other hand, this is another area where disparities in wealth clearly point out the great inequalities in our society. Wealthy families, in many cases, parents are already working from home. It'll be quite easy for them to be home with their children during the day when they are distance learning. Unfortunately, low-income parents are most likely working in service jobs that are not possible to do from home, and they will not be home their children, if the schools do not open, how will they be cared for? How will they manage to do distance learning from home if no one is home to supervise and take care of them? So we have a multi-pronged problem here: the safety of the schools, the health issues, but also the disparity in resources between wealthy and poor families, and the way that interacts with school, whether it be in-person school or school through the internet and distance learning. We had a study in New Haven that showed the poorest neighborhoods of the city had a much, much higher rate of failure to connect consistently and with distance learning than in other more affluent areas of the city. It is a real crisis that in the low income, especially the Latino neighborhoods, that's been a problem.
Yeah, I did want to ask you about the teachers, though. You can't lose sight of them either. I mean, a lot of these teachers say that they're, afraid to go back to school. How are these kids going to socially distance? Are they going to be able to wear their masks properly? I mean, do you think that teachers should be given hazard pay? I know that you and Senator Duff came out and said that you think hazard pay should continue for grocery workers, but what about teachers?
I would certainly be supportive of that. I think that this is an unusual circumstance, and the and the risks and the concern that teachers have are certainly valid and should be recognized in their compensation for this. But again, it's a multi-pronged problem in terms of being in school. I know some school systems are thinking about a hybrid system of having the schools open 4 days a week, with kids kids only going 2 days a week to provide greater distancing. So you would have half the students going 1 2-day period, another half the other 2 days, and the 5th day being available for teacher preparation so that they could present the lessons they would be doing online as well as the ones they're doing in person. But there are difficult choices to be made here, and we don't yet have clarity on how it should be managed in a way that is safe and equitable for both students and teachers, and also taking into account the differences in family resources and the fact that in many cases there is no one home to take care of children if they're not in school.
Right. Yeah, Senator, and when it comes to the COVID crisis, one of the things that obviously people are hoping for is the prospect of a vaccine. But what I wanted to ask you is, if there is a vaccine, when and if that happens, do you think that we need to legislate a mandate that would require people to get that vaccine?
Yes, I think there's no question that we should. For anyone for whom the vaccine is safe. Obviously, there are circumstances where people have health conditions or immune problems that make it unsafe for them to be vaccinated. That's similar to the situation we have now with child vaccinations. But given what we have seen of the health crisis caused by a disease for which we do not have a vaccination, should be a sobering thought for everyone. And I might want to also, I don't know if we have time, the 2 other bills that were passed in the special session providing caps on the cost of insulin and insulin supplies for diabetics. That's going to be critically important because the price of insulin has escalated so much in the last decade, even though the cost of producing it has not. There's been price gouging by the 3 main companies that provide insulin. That is something that we have addressed in the bill that we passed in special session, and also extending the governor's executive order on the issue of telehealth. We know in many cases people have been unable to see their doctors, have had to rely on telehealth visits. It's important that those visits be covered by insurance, whether they be audio visits done exclusively over the phone, as for many elderly people that's the only way possible, or those that are done over on video.
We got to let you go, Senator. I apologize. I think there might have been a little technical glitch there at the end. But State Senate President Pro Tempore Marty Looney, Senator, it's always great to talk to you. Thanks a lot.
Great talking with you, Matt. Take care.
All right, coming up next on The Real Story, we're going to reach across the aisle and talk to the Senate Republican leader, Len Fasano, what he thinks about the preparedness of the utility companies and, of course, that controversial police accountability bill.